Charlottesville, my home, and I am so proud of Charlottesville, and I'm so proud to be in this room, and I'm privileged to be in this room with you right now. And thank you all so much for being here. This is, just in terms of the nuts and the bolts, get us up to speed really quick with this project. This is as I understand it, this is the first edit. This is a work in progress, right?
Yeah, actually there was some footage that we couldn't include in tonight's screening that it didn't have release on. And there were some people, actually somebody just gave me some footage today. And so there's more still to the story as it develops. There might be a couple more interviews. I mean, we interviewed 32 people. Not all of those interviews actually made it on screen. But we had essentially a little over 2 months really to really pull this together. I mean, it's 3 months now, but we didn't really kind of pull everything together thinking we were going to do this for a couple of weeks, and we still had to deliver this a week before. So I was like, okay, can we actually do something in 2 months? And my challenge was to do it on budget and on time and do an okay job of it, and I don't know if it was okay.
You did.
I've got something to say real quick in order to keep a promise. So there's someone you saw on screen, Isaac Smith, who had been involved with Jason Kessler previously. We didn't make it clear enough in this edit in the film, and I want to make it clear that he renounces bigotry. He was politically involved with Jason Kessler until he realized that the guy was racist and anti-Semitic. And I don't want anyone to get the impression that he is a part of that.
And actually, I'd like to add one thing to that. And we tried to leave a lot of our opinions out when making this, tried to let the people speak and try to listen to them. If there's one opinion I could interject, and that is to leave the door open. Because there are people who, are renouncing, some of the elements of this, and you have to give them a place to go. Otherwise, they're going to stay in a safe place.
What was the most challenging part of this for you, Brian, besides the time and not sleeping much in the last 2 months?
I realized that when we started to do this, we were telling people we were going to do an objective piece. And there were some people who didn't want an objective piece. And I understand why. And I heard calls in the thing about when you saw the guy from the alt-right and not wanting to give a platform to those voices. We heard them up there, and it's been tough in this community since the event of us all kind of unraveling this and being at the center of piece of this. Also, for 2 months, we're looking at that every day. I mean, I want to go make music videos or something like that now. I'm like, God, a movie about puppy dogs, just like give me something happy to work on. I think it was. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes, that too. And that's part of the challenge right now. Yes.
Jackson, what's the? You and I have talked about this so many times on the radio, but I'm just curious. What video don't we have that you, as a filmmaker and as a journalist, you would want most of all that we don't have?
So you're just asking what we don't have?
What footage don't we have in this film? That in an ideal situation, you'd love footage of what?
Boy, if somebody said DeAndre, if we had a little bit, there is some more like kind of shaky cell phone footage of DeAndre, but if we had some footage of DeAndre, especially before on his way up to the parking garage, things that show his attackers a little bit more clearly, we'd like to see more of that. But honestly, I mean, this was. We had so much footage, we had so much to move through. And Natalie Jacobson here is a big part of how we were able to make sense of that. We had, I'm going to guess, probably hundreds of hours of footage that were provided to sort through. And I never felt like there's any one thing that we needed that we didn't have by the time it was all over. There's things like, oh, I wish we had better footage of what happened with DeAndre, or we went into this thinking nothing is, there's no one thing we can't take out. But it was Natalie who built this into, took hundreds of hours of footage and organized it into something we could digest a film out of.
And one thing that I'd like to, with the notion of what we wish we had more of, there's sort of a presupposition within that we know what it is we're looking for. And there's an element within this as we went into it of what we don't know. That, okay, I know what I perceived on that day, and the more that I talked to other people, what they perceived. But there were moments like when the Kelly talks about the singing, and the militia guys were acknowledging and saying thank you, and that when we went up to Pennsylvania to interview them, that they totally unsolicited told us this story when we asked, was there a bright moment in the day? And that's not something I would have known. It wouldn't be something like, hey, I wish I had that moment, because I didn't know that moment existed.
Well, they're white supremacists, and that's propaganda. So reporting is irresponsible.
Yeah. So the members of the militia, they do a weird thing that I wouldn't choose to do. Every one of them that I interviewed, told me that they rejected the idea of white supremacy. So I guess in the terms of, there's an idea of being, joining a group and saying that you're a white supremacist, and those are the people that kind of invaded here. But certainly there's also, I don't deny that white supremacism is baked into many institutions in the United States. So even somebody, many of us who think of ourselves as good people and we want to reject the swastika, that there could be, you've got these colonial ideas, you've got white supremacy baked into our lives in a lot of ways, and I certainly would agree with that point.
And, I hear you, but can we stop labeling it, please, as white supremacy? That's a methodology, that's a myth, that's an ideology. What we're battling right now is white privilege. Sure. That's where the problem really exists. And Corey, you asked a couple of questions ago, the toughest part about making this documentary. The toughest part about this piece was sitting here watching it. And for many of us having to relive it. You said you had to walk out several times. Imagine those of us that stood there and stared the devil dead in the eye on that day, and in the days leading up to it, and still in the days following it. Because they're not gone. That battle still exists. They're still here. Maybe not in the same numbers that they were here on that weekend, but very much they're still here. Not to put fear-mongering into anyone, but very easily the person sitting on your left, your right, in front of you, or behind you could very well be what we label as a neo-Nazi. So constantly be aware, please be vigilant, please be mindful, and always look out for each other, please.
What crossed your mind as you're watching this today? What are you left with? What feelings are you left with? Can you just share with us what you're thinking when you're watching this?
I have images. I have every day think of it. It was really hard to watch. Mainly because so many people, before all this, so many people swore that they would give their life for us. And we just had so many people around us on that day that protected us on that day. And if it wasn't for those people, some of us might have not been here either. As I said, my son and a couple of the Black Lives Matter members, they were right there. And when it all happened, I didn't know who got hit. And then after it all happened, they rushed me away. So I just didn't know where everybody was, my son, my friends. I didn't know who all was So that day still is really hard for me, especially with Heather. Because as we said, white people swore to give their life for us on that day. And a life was taken on that day. So to know that so many people stood by us to protect us that day is, I'm grateful that we had everybody surrounding us on that day. But the memories of seeing everything, I don't know if it'll ever go away. So seeing that movie, we didn't get to see a lot of it because we were at McGuffey Park the majority of the day. So we didn't get to see all of what was going on at Emancipation Park. So to watch all that, yeah.
Thank you. Natalie, I'm curious, you sat through hundreds of hours watching this. What did you learn that you didn't know before? Is there any one or two things that really jumped out at you after the hundreds of hours that you invested watching all the videos that came into you?
There's a process to looking through hundreds of hours. I started listening to it, and it's so vile and awful that at one point I had to just mute it, and I was looking for visuals that were more powerful or striking because it's deeply disturbing. So we were kind of going for a visual kind of look at some point. There's so much that we had to leave out. There's parts that were really horrible to me too, because there were some, specifically to me as a woman, because there was some hatred that we left out, had to leave out for a copyright thing, where there were these group of men discussing white Sharia, and it's put women in burqas and turned them out like Handmaid's Tale type of thing. And we left that out, and that was something that really affected me in a horrible way. And there's just that kind of thing, it's so hard to confront. So it was kind of this thing I had to compartmentalize, and probably it took a couple weeks before I was able to shut it down and just, it's going to work. And it's combing through, and it's just immediately you have to reject stuff that it's grainy, or we can't understand the content, or you start to file away. This is the car crash, this is a helicopter, this is the Emancipation Park. So it was kind of a step-by-step, and it was a really team effort because we all kind of took the burden of that day, and we all had to sift through that stuff, and it was horrible, and it has left a deep impression on me. There's so much more, there's so far to go. I had an idea. I mean, I have friends, my partner, people of color, and I know that there's so much pain in the community, but looking through that footage, there's so much more than I understood in the beginning. So I learned a lot about that, and I'm trying to learn still about what I can do and how I can keep healing or moving forward. But yeah, there's a lot more conversations that happened that day beyond just who we look, what we look like. It's awful. There's so much more to it. Thank you.
I want to get to you as quickly as possible. First, any questions you have, and I'm going to ask you just to stand and say your name and speak as loudly as you can. I will try to repeat what I hear so everybody can hear what the question is. But before we do, Brian, aside from the film, as a resident of Charlotte, what's the takeaway from you? And Natalie talks about the healing that still has to take place in this community, which I think this event, I'd like to think is a part of that. It certainly is for me. But what's the takeaway from you and your thoughts going forward?
Well, a fellow filmmaker kind of took me to task early on in this process and encouraged me to shut up and listen. And I really took his words to heart, and I really tried to shut up and listen, and in listening to the interviews that we did and to hear their perspectives, it really makes me appreciate a lot. I mean, there was a certain aspect, I think Mary Kelly said at one point that, you know, that whether she understands racism or not, and I think I have 2 daughters, and at one point I decided that I don't understand women. And I think that that's the first process to actually trying to understand something. So for me to say, like, okay, I'm trying to get to a place, and the comment over here about white privilege is real. And that trying to come to terms with what that is. I mean, I'm the epitome of white privilege. And so how can I work on a project like this? How can I have a perspective that's even valid listening to? So maybe it's not to have a perspective, it's to have a perspective and just communicate with other people. And what is the summation of that perspective? So for me, it's to listen more. And as I keep talking, sorry.
Don, yes, please.
Yeah, and Brian Jackson, I am truly grateful for the piece that you put together. I'm grateful for the concert that Dave Matthews put together. But as a community, we can't really begin to even talk about healing or the healing process until we begin to get answers as to why it happened.
Amen.
And what they're going to do, what the city is going to do to prevent it from ever happening again. As a city, we have been devoid and deprived of real leadership. And it's sinful, it's immoral. And until we can get some concrete resolution and some definitive answers as to what led up to that weekend, and not only that weekend, we need to explore May the 13th. We need to explore July the 8th. We need to explore August 11th, August 12th, and as recently as October 22nd when they came back with the tiki torch.
Absolutely.
And until we can get some responses from the city to explain why, where the ball was dropped, how you're going to prevent that fumbling in the future, we can never begin the healing process.
By a show of hands, questions please, instead of speeches. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. Yes, please.
I guess maybe I should take that one.
Yeah, let me repeat the question so everybody can hear it. Why? The question was, what about the police? Why is it? And I was watching your live feeds and early that morning, and it was just repeated again and again and again by everyone there. Why aren't they doing anything?
As a journalist, I've been investigating this continuously since starting on the 12th. We are getting somewhere. Right now, Natalie Jacobson and I, we both. So we filed a FOIA request. I think I filed the first Freedom of Information Act request against the city. I think the Monday or Tuesday after the 12th, and then I filed FOIA requests with the state police also. And long story short, we have it's in court now. We had our first hearing last week. We are being represented by the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And I mean, I'm fighting. I'm trying to get answers for you. So one thing I'll point out is, okay, who did the state police report to? Who does the National Guard report to? The governor, Governor Terry McAuliffe. He gives orders to the National Guard, and they did the same thing that the Charlottesville State Police did. You could see them in the film standing there and watching what happened. Another thing that I can tell you is that at one point a few weeks ago, I sent a FOIA request to the state police, and then we started getting responses from the Office of the Governor. And then, in fact, at one point a few weeks ago, when we were about to go to court on this, we got a message from a phone call to one of our lawyers from Terry McAuliffe's counsel, asking would we please hold this until after the election. That happened. So anyway, that's where that is. We're working on it.
If any of you all were here yesterday to see Spike Lee, you know he was very direct and very pointed. Spike's not here today, so let me say this. There is no way that somewhere between 800 to 1,000 sworn officers decided individually that they would stand by and watch people literally get the hell beat out of them just feet away from them. Cut it up, color it, put it in a nice box, call it whatever you want to. If you put wings on a pig, that doesn't make it an eagle. Those officers had to be given a directive and an order from someone. Now, who it was, that's where we need the information for. But somebody had to direct them to not intervene, to not get involved. And the result is a murder and the deaths of 2 state troopers. And to this point, no one's been held accountable for it. And it's sinful.
I thought it was very powerful. I was wondering with the interviews, it very much felt to me like the interviews with the paramilitary individuals sounded like they were coming off as referees or neutral arbiters. And so I don't know if other people thought that way, but I was sort of wondering what your philosophy was, because I don't consider them neutral in any capacity.
The question was about the militia group, which I read Lloyd Snook's Facebook page, so I know that's illegal. But anyway. What were your thoughts on the interviews with the militia guys?
That's how, Brian did some of them also. The interview process was collaborative. I wrote interview questions and sat next to the camera and asked questions. And Brian would ask the questions that I just he would pick up the things that oh, that was dumb, I didn't think to ask that. And there were some that Brian did without me also. Since I was part of that interview process, I'll say, it's representing how they feel about themselves. It's not it's not within the scope of the film to adjudicate whether they really, in some higher sense, were what they think of themselves. We're showing what happened and how people feel about themselves and what they think and what their role is. So as a journalist, it's not my job to adjudicate that. Somebody else could make an excellent documentary, I think, examining that question. But we put it out there, and one thing, Wesley Harris from the Film Festival, who's a programming director, Wesley was a big part of making this happen and really encouraged us. And this wouldn't have happened without him. But one thing he said to us when we started this was, "Don't underestimate your audience. We can put things in front of you, and you can make up your own mind."
Ryan, do you want to respond to that really quick, and then we're going to get one more question in?
When I arrived that day on the 12th and saw all the paramilitaries, it scared the crap out of me. I thought it accentuated the tension. I thought these guys have no place being here. I followed them, actually. There's a sequence where we were in the parking lot and they were doing that sort of march eventually towards Friendship Court, and I got right in front of them going you guys have any idea where you're going? And at that point they did stop, and it was questionable to me what their motives were, and then when they came back, there was a woman right behind me, and she fell right in front of me and smashed her face on the pavement. She was bleeding, and these guys all of a sudden started giving her medical care, and I thought she was with them, and I was like, tough. You're a jerk. You're with these other crazies. And I felt terrible about myself, even in that moment, that here's this person who just smashed their face, and because I think, turns out, she was a reporter. And actually, I used to work with her in New York. And she and I kind of connected. And there's a picture, afterward, where they bandaged up her head, and one of the militia guys is smiling next to her, and she's kind of smiling. And 2 weeks later, at a protest in New York City, they were carrying a picture of her with a Nazi mustache drawn on her as a Nazi sympathizer and chanting her name. And so there was an element within that that I felt kind of obligated to try to set some of the story straight of what, and I don't know what these 3%, I can't get into their brains, but one thing that came out of this film too was these guys came from 5 hours. We drove 5 hours north of Pennsylvania to interview these guys. They came that far because they felt compelled for First Amendment or Second Amendment, whatever their reason was. That was one interesting thing that came out of all this, that all these people descended on Charlottesville because they felt they had to be here, that this was something that they didn't even have a choice in, that they had, but everybody felt like they were on the angel side. That was what was fascinating to me. You talk to the alt-right guys, and they're saving the world from communism. You're talking to the, Antifa people, and they're saving it from fascists. And there's racism, and there's all these other elements. But like everybody, that was what was fascinating. Everybody thinks they're doing good.
We have time for one more question, real quick. One more question. Yes. Oh. I think everybody's heard you, haven't they? Yeah. Do you have a question? Do you have a question? All ears.
Did you hear me from the balcony? And my second question is, how are you saying this is objective when you're giving people like Derek Davis a platform in your film?
So she's asking how it's objective when we're giving people like Derek Davis a platform in the film. So we don't note that he describes what happens, but we did not allow him to make a case for his ideology.
You did.
Let him answer. Let him answer. Give him a chance to answer.
Yeah, no, I mean he says what he thinks about that day, but we don't let him start talking about white nationalism or anything like that. And part of being objective is that's hearing what somebody has to say. But we did draw a line on allowing somebody to say why they think white nationalism or white supremacy is a good idea.
Ryan, do you want to respond to that? And then we are so up against the clock. I'm sorry. They got another event in here.
Your question is right. And your question is valid.
Can you give him a chance to respond? Can you give him a chance to respond?
I'm not working with the Charlottesville police on anything. I'm suing them.
I don't have a good answer.
Can you give a big round of applause for the